Hi, and welcome to this training video for the Tennessee Historical Newspaper Indexing Project. In this video, we're going to talk about how you do the indexing and go field by field so that you have lots of examples to refer to as you are doing your own indexing work. Let's start by doing an overview of the indexing form. When you're on the From the Page site and you pull up the digital image, beneath the image is a spreadsheet that you'll be able to complete in order to do your work. The spreadsheet has several columns, as you see listed here: column, organization, prefix, given name, last name, suffix, non-white, photo, and article type. We're going to talk about each of these columns and how you fill it out. A general note to know is that you can use your tab key on your keyboard to jump from cell to cell. That might save you some clicking along the way. And as you are filling out the spreadsheet, you will get to a point where it looks like you're going to run out of cells. All you need to do is go ahead and hit enter to add more rows. So you may decide to hit enter multiple times to give you some space to work with, or you may decide to hit enter one row at a time. That's completely up to you. Let's start with the instructions for the column named column. As you might expect, this is where you tell us which column of the page you are working on. It is traditionally the case that newspapers are laid out by column, and it makes sense to do our indexing that way as well. What we're asking you to do is put the number of the column into this particular column. So you'll put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sometimes there are pages that have 7 or 8 columns. We're asking you to enter numbers, not words, and enter just the number. So if I were indexing the first column of this page of the Athens Post, in that first column, I would just type the number 1. I would not type column 1, just the number 1, the digit itself. And as we've mentioned in the other videos, when indexing, you can stop at any time, at any column, just add a note to tell us where you left off. And here's a screenshot again of that notes and questions section at the bottom of each page. The next column is for us to capture any organizations that are mentioned on the newspaper page. So in this first clipping, we have a notice about the Nichols House in Bristol, that it is presided over by Mr. W.P. Hamilton, and that they formerly managed the Hamilton House. So we are interested in capturing these organizations, which can include benevolent associations, businesses, churches, fraternal organizations and lodges, schools, societies, and more. So in this particular clipping, we would index Nichols House. We would index Hamilton House, because these are places or businesses, so to speak, of the community. We want to capture that. As you enter the organization, please put it in its own row separate from any individuals named. So in the second clipping, we have Mr. M.G.O.W. Bird of the Beaver Ridge Nursery. So in doing the index for this, on one row, we would enter his name, M.G.O.W. Bird. On the next row, we would enter the organization, Beaver Ridge Nursery. Then on the third row, we would enter the name of the newspaper, Knoxville Chronicle. So Beaver Ridge and Knoxville Chronicle are two organizational names that we want to capture. But again, put each organization on its own row, separate from the name of any person that might be in the article. The prefix field. This is where we are able to enter any prefixes that are provided next to each person's name. So we have some clippings, and let's talk through how you would index them. The first example is one where we have a couple mentions together. So you see in the top clipping, it says Mr. and Mrs. W.M. Chesson. We're asking you to index these two individuals on their own line. So the first line would be Mr. W.M. Chesson. The second line would be Mrs. W.M. Chesson. So please put them on their own line. But Mr. and Mrs. are prefixes. You may see examples where there is a plural mention. So in the second clipping, we have Mrs. Maggie and Dora Morgan. Well, Mrs. means the word Miss goes in front of Maggie and the word Miss goes in front of Dora. So you would index them as Miss in the prefix field, Maggie Morgan. Miss in the prefix field, Dora Morgan. You will have many different prefixes that you see in the newspaper images. So you may have captain, sheriff, superintendent. And while these are not your traditional Mr., Mrs., Dr., Reverend, as they are positions, they are used as a prefix for that person's name. So we would love for you to go ahead and capture that on the spreadsheet. Now you may see examples where there are two prefixes, such as the last clipping, Mrs. Dr. Frank Brown. Both of those prefixes would go into the prefix field. So this would get indexed into the prefix field would be Mrs. Dr. And of note, please do not include any periods as you are including these prefixes. So again, at the bottom, Mrs. and Dr., it would be MRS space DR. That is what gets entered into the prefix field, no periods. Let's talk about indexing given names, last name, and suffixes. So a given name will include the middle initials. So if someone is mentioned with middle initials, you will put that into the given name field. If there are initials, we ask that you put space between each. So if it says W.M. Chesson, W space M is what you would enter into the given name. If there is no first name, go ahead and leave that field blank. So in the top clipping here, we have Mr. Phelps. So Mr. would go into the prefix field. The given name would be left blank, and Phelps would go into the last name field. We ask that you do not include people that are just alluded to, but not specifically named. So here in this same clipping with Mr. Phelps, it does mention his kind wife, but she is not named. So you would not try to index her. Also, do not index if you see phrases like and daughter and son, but their name is not mentioned. Now, down at the bottom clipping, we have an example of a man who has MD at the back of his name. So this is a suffix. So he would be entered as B in the given name, no period, cheers in the last name, and then in the suffix field, put MD. So suffixes may include MD, Esquire, Junior, Senior, and you'll see more. And when you're indexing suffixes, again, no periods, please. And if the suffix is initials, we would like for you to put those together. There's no need to put a space. So the M and the D would go right next to each other. You would not need to do M space D. Now you will see many examples, especially as you're looking at advertisements of businesses that have surnames in them. So here's an example of an advertisement for King, Hodge and Company. So we're asking you to not index the individual surnames, but index the company name. So you'll want to index these names together, even though they are the surnames of individuals. We also are asking you not to include ampersands, periods, or commas. So in this particular example, this would be indexed as King, Hodge, Co. No ampersand, no period. When we get the final data available for browsing and viewing in our final website put together, we'll be sure to include instructions to users that these organization names do not include these characters. Let's talk about aliases. You will see sometimes individuals have aliases next to their name. So here's a clipping where we have S.J. Cardin, alias felonious assault, continued by defendant. And we have James Hamilton, alias James Hammond, for housebreaking and larceny. How do we index these? Well, S.J. Cardin would be S.J. into the first name. Last name would be Cardin and add the word alias. To index James Hammond, we would put James as his first name, and the last name would be Hamilton, followed by the word alias, because it is the Hammond that is the alias in this case. His name is James Hamilton, but he also goes by the name James Hammond. It's that last name that is the alias. So we just ask you to enter the word alias after the part of the name that is the alias. Non-white. In order to facilitate research of individuals that are not white, we do have a checkbox field that can be used if you see on the newspaper page that that person is referred to with a race that is not white. So in the top example, Deputy Sheriff Fagan carried Lloyd Arnold, the Negro, who was convicted of manslaughter. Lloyd Arnold is not white. So next to his name on that row, you would check the box for non-white. Similarly, at the bottom clipping, we have indication of two colored boys, Robert Ball and Arthur Collins. So they are specifically mentioned as not being white. So you would index their names and then check the box for non-white. We decided to use a checkbox in order to avoid using terminology that is no longer used present day. And you will see a variety of terminology used to represent individuals of non-white race. So we wanted to standardize that and use a checkbox option instead. Photos. You may be working on a newspaper page and there is a photo. And so if that is the case, we have a checkbox for that as well. In this particular example, we have a photo on the left of Miss Hollingsworth with some description, and there is a photo of her. So when you put her name into the spreadsheet, Miss as the prefix, Maddie as the first name, Hollingsworth as the last name, you would go ahead and check the box for photo because this particular article or clipping does include her photo. And the final column for the spreadsheet is for you to tell us what is the type of article you are indexing. Now, we want to point out that these article types are meant to describe the context of a news item. It does not necessarily mean that each person named is in fact affected by the article type. For example, if you're indexing a death notice, there are often going to be many people named in addition to the person who's passed away. So if there are 5 people named in the clipping, on all 5 rows, you would choose death notice or obituary because their name was mentioned in the context of a death notice or obituary. It doesn't mean all 5 of those individuals are the ones that have passed away. Our article types include advertisements, birth announcements, death notices or obituaries, home economics, letters, marriage announcements / licenses, military news, personals, public notices, and sports. So this is a select list for you to choose from. You're not going to be able to enter any article type that does not appear on this list. So we offer this as a way to provide some additional information around the context for each name mentioned. And we see this as being a big help once the data is made searchable and available for others to use. So let us know if you have any questions about using these fields, and we look forward to your participation on the project.